trying to fully automate science. I don't think that's possible, but rather we're trying to make sure that we can give scientists superpowers. Really give them something that really extends their minds and their capabilities so that they can do science better and faster. And so that's kind of the goal with the system.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 10, I think it is, of the Polling Principle. Today I'm here with Vivek Natarajan. And I'm very, very excited actually about this conversation because I've been wanting to talk with you for quite a while. And I have a whole bunch of questions, and hopefully we'll have enough time to go through all this stuff. But before anything, thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for taking the time. I'd love to begin with a little bit of an intro about yourself, your background, how you ended up coming to Google, a little bit about your work at Google, what kinds of things you're interested in, and then we will move on from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah. Again, thanks so much for having me, and really a pleasure to be over here. Yeah, I'm a research scientist over here at Google, where I've been broadly working at the intersection of AI and medicine and science over the last 6 years now. Um, yeah, I mean, my background before this was I did my undergrad in India in electronics and communication engineering, then came over to the US to my grad school. And it was free deep learning, but it was pretty clear that AI is going to have a profound impact. And so I was very desperate to work on this. And so uh, yeah, I had the opportunity to learn from some very amazing people during my grad school. Um, and and yeah, I mean it's been a fun ride, just seeing how much the field was progressing. And so 2012 to 2016, just seeing all the progress that was happening with deep learning, in different applications, different benchmarks. How we were reaching state of the art performance, and also in terms of business critical metrics being moved. And so I mean that kind of convinced me that yeah, I mean the deep learning and AI is going to be here, and so where is AI going to have the most profound impact? So that was the question I was trying to answer. And I mean at that point of time, I mean I knew nothing about health and medicine, but it felt like that's going to be one area where AI can have deep impact, because if we just think about it, it's one of those root node problems, right? There's so many people who don't have access to medical expertise. So many diseases that are so complex and can cause chaos and yeah. So if you were to able to diagnose people properly and find cures for their diseases and help them lead their best possible lives, then it felt like you could have profound impact in the world. And so that's what motivated me to join Google, and I'm been very grateful to have this opportunity to work with some really stellar people on these problems.
Awesome. Yeah, it kind of reminds me. There was one saying that I think people say of Jeff Bezos, right? Who says, what are the things that are not going to change, a year or 10 years or 100 years from now, right? And in that case, it's like, well, people will always want, good products and cheap prices and fast delivery and so on, right? And I guess that is a universal truth in healthcare as well, right? Like people are always want to be, healthy, right? And avoid disease and live, live as long as possible, right?
Yeah.
Um, I guess maybe to get started, I'd love to talk a little bit about Amy. Amy, how do you pronounce Amy?
I think there's no consensus, but let's go with Amy. Yeah.
Amy. Okay. So I'd love to begin a little bit of Amy, and this is something that I was talking also a few weeks ago with our common friend Trisha, right? The Harvard School of Public Health, and um, and I think it's very very interesting, right? Like it's what he said, right? And in my mind is very fair. Is maybe the first time that you have this um, language model, the system built around the language model that is able to diagnose a patient with a level of accuracy or level of quality very similar to a human doctor, right? Um, and maybe to get started, I'd love to understand a little bit more about, you know, um, what is the purpose, right? Or like when you were working on it, what was the intention of building a system like this?
Yeah, I think I mean, the motivations go back to, for me at least, the roots of growing up in India. Um, I knew a lot of people who had not seen doctor in their entire lifetimes. Because it's extremely challenging. Sometimes you have to walk 30, 40 miles in extreme heat, or giving up on a day's wages or like going without food. So yeah, it felt like one of those root node problems that you could solve better. And it's also like one of those grand challenges, right? Like people since like the 1970s have been like thinking about building AI systems that can do clinical reasoning and diagnosis. So if you go back and like you look at some of the earlier AI papers, you would see like some like real stalwarts in the field, like dating back to 1970s at like MIT and other places, who've tried to like build these systems. But like the approaches they were taking were obviously like back in the day, like, logic based, Bayesian networks and things like that. And those things did not scale, did not work properly. Um, but I guess like we were at the right place at the right time when like the technology advanced enough. The large language model revolution came through. I mean, deep learning was like fairly mature. And so, I mean, in some ways, we're like very, very fortunate that like the right environment existed to make like real tangible progress over here. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where this kind of like journey like started. Right, I distinctly remember having like a conversation with like my dear teammate, like Dr. Alan Karthikesalingam, who's at DeepMind, but is also like a practicing vascular surgeon. And like yeah, I mean, we've been doing this together for years now. And so he had come over to Mountain View and we were having like a dinner over dosas. And we had just gotten access to like the first version of Google's like GPT-3 models, like the Palm based models. It's still early, like very, very rough, but like we were shocked to see like the kind of things it was able to do, the kind of like few shot learning, instruction following. And so that kind of like told us, okay, the moment for healthcare has arrived. Because before that, like there was still like a lot of work in AI for healthcare, but it was largely restricted in the academic domain. It used to be like a lot of papers in Natures and things like that, AI for like, medical imaging, mammography, things like that, right? But like there was no real like pull from the healthcare industry. Like doctors did not really want them, and I think the reasons for them were like for that was also fairly obvious because these were like very narrow specialist models that could do only one task well. And even for that, like if you train like a model on like one hospital's data, and then you take it to the other hospital down the street, it will just miserably fail. So it's not generalizable. It's like brittle. There was no like interaction abilities. Like the model could not like talk about like uncertainty and things like that. But like with large language models, it felt very obvious that all of that would change. It would not happen overnight, but like we're going to get like all of those things. And yeah, I mean, again, like very fortunate that like ChatGPT came around. Like people got more used to seeing like AI that can be delightful and helpful. Um, but I guess the biggest surprise for us was basically just like over the last 3-4 years, there's this complete inversion where now there is this pull from like the healthcare industry and doctors to use AI. Like we don't have to go around like convince people to use it. Right? It's like, okay, well, like when can I get your latest model? Like when can I get your system? Because again, there's like a bunch of problems again with the health system that people realize that there's no solution without AI over here. Otherwise, the healthcare system is at like breaking point over here. But it's just like that complete shift that happened in the course of like a year, like a few months. So that was like the remarkable thing. And yeah, for us again, as I said, like we were in many ways like quite fortunate, like being at the right place at the right time. But then we realized that I mean the ingredients were there. You still have to like cook the dish. And so that's what we've been doing over the last few years. Like first with our work on MedPalm, where we showed that these systems can like ace like some very complex benchmarks, such as like doing like medical licensing exam style questions, and then moved over to like more gradually like full scale conversational medical consultations and things like that. And so yeah, it's a journey. I think we're still like fairly early, but I think everyone can see like the arc of progress over here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, like you said, the healthcare industry is now starting to cool a little bit, right? And the people posted anecdotes of like going to the doctor and then the doctor just opening a new window on the
Yeah,
computer and then checking with ChatGPT, right?
yeah.
Before giving them a diagnosis. Uh, so what would you say? I mean, I'll ask you maybe the same question that I was asking Trishan back then, but like, what are your perspective the main barriers of adoption to this type of technology, right? Is it regulatory? Is it, financial or incentives? Is it technical? Like, what would you say are the things that are maybe preventing us from using this technology more exhaustively?
I mean, I can't like comment on like the wider industry practices and things like that because I mean, we already know that like doctors are using LLM based systems in different ways, whether it's authorized or regulated or not, and obviously patients are also like using it. And like there's like so many stories of like some LLM like ChatGPT or Gemini helping you with like diagnosis or understanding like medical jargon or getting you the right information at the right time. So yeah, I mean, earlier it felt like it was mostly cherry picked and anecdotal, but right now I think that's no longer the case. If you were to do like a large scale study, you would see a lot of adoption already. And like it's probably having like mostly positive outcomes as well. Um, so yeah, I think for us, it's probably the other way around. It's more like, okay, there's so much buzz around the technology. There's so much interest, but how do we ensure that we are not deploying something, say, that is not fully well tested or is unsafe? How do we deploy such that we are able to like measure uh, outcomes and metrics and like in a rigorous and comprehensive way? Because I think if we follow that path and like keep on generating evidence and keep on doing deployments in like a safe manner, then I think like eventually over like a 5-year period, we'll have like mass adoption at scale because the evidence exists and like we've done things the right way. I think the only risk is like no, I feel right now is that like there's so much exuberance that we still haven't maybe like as a community, as like researchers, as like developers, we haven't like tested adequately the systems that we are building, and people are just using it maybe like left, right, and center without like fully understanding where it might fail. And so I think that that is kind of like the risk I see over here on like safety and like evaluations that are not fully done. And like there's like marketing that is happening saying, oh, you can use this as your doctor or whatever. So we try to avoid that. Like, so you would see like none of our systems are like openly available yet, but we're like gradually progressing through like different phases of studies. It's almost like how you would bring like a drug to market, right? So you would do like, preclinical studies, like animal studies. Once that works, you progress to like different phases of clinical trial. It's kind of the same with us. So we've done like work in simulations. Now we're doing like a real world prospective study with real patients in a clinic, but then we have like complete supervision at all times. So it's almost like similar to like how, in like 2016, 2017 and all, you would have these Waymo cars all over like the Bay Area, but there would always be like a safety driver behind. And so that's what we are doing right now, like collecting all those like miles or like consultations over here, but under supervision. And then like we'll see like where the system's doing well, where it's like failing, and like what sort of impact that we can have. And then when as we keep on like collecting this evidence and like making progress, we can tune down like the amount of like oversight there is in the system. Uh, but it is important to make sure that there's always oversight. So you should not be deploying it in settings where, for example, there's like no expert doctor in the loop to like override and take over, right? So because anytime the system could make something that could be like give like a bad advice and that could have like pretty dangerous consequences. And so that's the thing that we try to avoid. So it's not like barriers to adoption. It's about more like doing things the right way.
Yep. I think an interesting concept from the self-driving car world is this idea of levels of autonomy, for example, right? Where you go and say, and you have different scales at which you trust the system to be able to operate independently, and then maybe at a lower level, it's just going on the highway, but not necessarily changing lanes.
Yeah.
Then at the higher level, it's going by itself, autonomously in a city or a complex environment where there may be people walking by and bicycles and so on and so forth, right? Um, would something like that make sense here? When you have, say, I don't know, a medical model, and you said, what, a level one model, can understand an X-ray and then, tell you if you need to, dig deeper, right? And a level four model, can write a prescription, right? And a level five model, will do your entire, medical, I don't know, consultation or whatnot, right? Would something like that make sense?
I think it's roughly very, very similar over here. I think. Again, I don't have like exact mappings over here, but you could imagine that the initial levels are almost like what you have in your lane assist kind of systems. Like similar to that, we have like doctor assist systems that are like helping you with like some of the administrative work that you have as a doctor, coming up with like those notes and like formatting them, creating the messages for your clinician team, for your patients. And then like as you step up through these levels of autonomy, like them doing more and more of the work around like, diagnosis and management reasoning and treatment recommendations and things like that. And then, yeah, I mean, if you are at like the highest possible levels, then hopefully the system can fully autonomously act as a doctor. But again, I think there's certain limitations as to what you can do as an AI system that's like contained within like a computer in a data center. Because a lot of like the work as a doctor is in the real world, like, things like physical exam, surgery, but also beyond that, just the human to human communication aspects around empathy and like how you provide care. I think those things are probably not going to go away anytime soon.
Yep.
Um, so, so you won't have like full, I mean, it's who knows after like 10-15 years whether they're like robot doctors or whatever. um, but I think for like the next few years, I think we'll have systems that are extremely capable, but they would still be like agents that are supervised by an expert doctor. And my hope is that would then, I mean, it will obviously lead to like reconfiguration in the healthcare system as and how like doctors pursue medicine. But I hope that that definitely brings like joy back to medicine as a whole.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting, and I've had this conversation also with Trishan as well, right? About how in some um, countries or in some medical systems, maybe it would be possible to move faster, right? Because there's less, regulations or whatever, right? Like, and the analogy that I like very much is how in some countries in Africa, for example, like they just didn't use landline telephones, right? Like they went directly to have cell phones, right? And then they didn't use credit cards. They went directly to mobile payments, right? Yeah. In some places, you have cell phones and mobile payments, being much more popular than in the U.S., for example, or in other Western economies, right? And I wonder if something like that could happen here, right? Where maybe in the U.S. or in Western Europe, for example, it may become very, very hard to use this technology because of all the baggage and all the legacy. And then you would have in other countries, I don't know, maybe in India, where the alternative is just not having any medical care at all, right? And then having an app that you can talk to and take photos, and that will help you diagnose and maybe prescribe some specific medications, right? With a little data for abuse or whatever, right? Like maybe that could happen much much sooner than it could for us in the U.S.
Yeah, again, I think we have to be careful about this because I think my worry is that like a large part of like the global south is super like under resourced, and that means there's like no mechanism for oversight. Right, and so when you don't have that like safety net in the system, um, there's nothing that can be done to prevent harm.
Yeah,
So I think like the deployment has to be done in a careful manner. Obviously, the other argument is just like nothing, and something's better than nothing, right? But I think it's important to do this in like a careful manner, right? I think um, again, I think it won't be like an overnight flick of like a switch or something like that. It's going to be like more gradual. I mean, adoption is already happening. I wouldn't be surprised if like there's like hundreds of millions of users across like countries like in India and Africa already using different forms of medical AI, whether that's directly as patients or whether as clinicians is using it to like look up information and things like that. I think that's great. But like more as we progress through these levels of autonomy with like more capable systems, I think we need to make sure that there's oversight.
got it. Yeah, and one of the reasons why I think drug discovery, for example, is maybe more interesting is because there is always that extra layer of validation, right? Like whereas in medical care, you give a diagnosis and you give somebody a prescription, and then maybe it's the wrong prescription. Um, there's not much learning that goes back, right? There's not much validation. In drug discovery, you can come up with a molecule or a drug that you may want to repurpose for a different disease. Then you can test that experimentally, and then you iterate back and forth. Right? It's just inherently a slower process, but with a lot of checks that are built in my mind. So maybe let's move on to the next project. I think that you've been working on that I think was just announced. What was it, a few weeks ago, a month ago
It's been
already?
2 months now. Yeah.
2 months. Yeah, which is the AI co-scientist, which I think is super super exciting. Um, Maybe for the sake of everybody else that may not have heard about it, like you mind doing a little bit of an introduction, like what it is, how it works, right, and specifically like what kinds of things you're going to apply to.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, maybe I can start by actually drawing out the connection between this one and Amy as well. Um, right. I think so. A lot of people ask us like, why do you do these projects, both these projects at the same time? And yeah, it's just that I feel like these are like two sides of the same coin. So I mean, you can come up with like $1 billion molecule or drug, but if you're not able to like get it to patients at the right time, then there's no point in having that drug. And especially like, there's like drugs on like Alzheimer's in the market right now, which has this very specific window in which you have to like administer that drug. Otherwise, it doesn't have any effect. And a lot of patients just miss out on that because again, like like access to neurosurgeons, like or neurology specialty. That's like some anywhere between like 6 to 14 months in the US right now. It's an impossible.
Lots of controversy about whether they work well and so on. Yeah.
Exactly, but you have to get it at the right time. So you have to like diagnose, but you also have to have the cure. So like the diagnosing, the treatment recommendation part is Amy, and like helping us like find cures, understanding or improving our understanding of biology. That's the part that's we are trying to do with the eco-scientist. And again, I think with both these projects, we're not trying to replace the experts, like whether that's doctors or scientists. I think what we're trying to do is to like give them superpowers. And so with AI co-scientists, what we feel is I think we are at this stage with um, LLM based systems. They have a lot of like expertise that are actually quite complementary to what like human scientists can do. So I think like I mean right now, like how many papers can like human scientists read in like any given week, right? It's, like if you're trying to do like a good comprehensive job, that's probably going to be some tens of papers, like dozens of papers.
Yeah.
Like the AI system that we have today can do like millions of papers in like literally no time, like an hour or so. So there's like so much knowledge that it can like firstly curate and like retrieve and synthesize. And then the second thing is like, okay, once you have that knowledge curate and synthesize, can you then like present that information in an intelligent manner so that like scientists can like build on top of it? So that's kind of our goal. Like, okay, like so for example, if say a scientist proposes um, like a complex problem or a topic, and this AI is almost like an assistant that goes and studies all about it. But what would ordinarily take like humans, like maybe I don't know, sometimes even their entire PhD to go and study about this, maybe the system can do it in a much shorter amount of time. And then when it comes back with like ideas and proposals and well thought out like rationale that are hopefully like as good of a quality as like someone with like deep expertise in that field, like someone who's close to completing like a PhD or something like that. So that's kind of the idea. So the system focuses more on like the cognitive aspects of the scientific method. So things around like literature review and synthesis and summarization, or also like hypothesis generation, experimental protocols, coming up with those plans, and just helping scientists in those aspects. And increasingly after that, I mean, once you have those ideas, you may want to do like different kinds of like data analysis, or like convert them into like different kinds of academic publication formats and things like that. So yeah, so those are the tasks that we want to focus on. And it's co-scientists because we're not trying to fully automate science. I don't think that's possible, but rather we're trying to like make sure that like we can give like scientists superpowers. Really like give them like something that really extends their minds and their capabilities so that they can do science better and faster. And so that's kind of like the goal with the system.
Yeah. Before continuing, let me take deeper into one of the things that you said, which is,
Yes.
you don't think it's possible to fully replace a scientist, but in the area of software development, for example, there's a lot of folks that are working on literally trying to replace a software engineer as a junior software engineer, right? Like, the folks building, the Debians and so on and so forth. But the whole point of it is, of course, like we have many, many systems that are helping software engineers become more productive, but there's people that are trying to say, can we, um, avoid having this person at all and have a system that works fully autonomously, right? Which I think is a much more complicated goal, right? But we don't need to get into that, right? But you don't think that that would be possible, say, in a few years once the technology advances, once the systems are more reliable, we know how to use them better?
I think for me, it's almost like the difference is like software engineering is self-contained within like the digital world. Right, I think you can, like all of the work can be done using digital interfaces with your laptop with access to some data center with a like computer. Whereas I don't think the act of doing science can be restricted to the digital world. That's like very narrow domain of doing science.
Yep.
So much of it is actually in the physical world. Right? Whether you do like wet lab experiments, whether you do like field studies, yeah, like so many different aspects of science, right? And so, and I don't think we have AI systems that trying to fully automate science is, I think, the like you need to first crack general purpose robotics, and to me that is like 10 to 15 years away in some ways. And again, even if you do that, I don't know if it's actually, um, yeah. I mean, from me, it doesn't feel like that's worth trying to do because I feel like, um, I mean, humans are good. Like, why do you want to automate and replace them? Right? And so, like, So yeah, I mean that's kind of our like perspective and take. Like I think like fully automating sense. I mean, there's going to be obviously narrow domains in which you will have like automated labs and like certain equipments that can generate like high quality feedback and data at scale. All that's good, but that's only going to constrain your exploration to a normal part. Whereas like imagine like what like a grad student in a wet lab does, right? I think they have like they can like do multiple different experiments with different kinds of equipment in no time, because that's just how the human brain and the human body works. It's incredibly like flexible, incredibly like fast learning. We are nowhere near that with like physical robots or even with our AI systems, right? And um, so that doesn't mean we can't have like an impact on science and accelerate it without like a breakthrough in general purpose robotics. I just feel that's like it's a red herring in some ways going
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but there's definitely people working on, say, robots for chemical synthesis, right?
Yeah, it's narrow domains.
Liquid handling or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, maybe it will take a little bit longer, right? I don't
yeah,
think
and
that.
I don't think that's true science, because if your robots are constrained, then there's like no real novelty or exploration that you're doing over there, anyways. It's kind of like already so. I mean, you're doing engineering at that point of time. I mean, I think there's no point in calling that science then.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like, what would be the difference between science and engineering? Okay, if you're trying to find a novel material, for example, right? Are you doing science or are you doing engineering? Right? Like, if you're following, the currently known laws of physics, you just need to find a new formulation or a new way to design a material, then everything else is automated. I don't know, like maybe that's more engineering than science. Still incredibly useful, right? But like, yeah, maybe you wouldn't win a Nobel Prize, with it.
Yeah, I mean, no comment on the utility. I think it's mostly just a philosophical question. Like, what are you actually doing over there, basically?
Yeah. So what kinds of um areas, what kinds of things are you thinking about applying this, right? I think in your original paper, when your co-scientist white paper, you talk a little bit about repurposing drugs, finding novel drugs. And then I think there was a third example as well. I don't
Yeah,
remember which one was exactly right, but it seems like everything is tied to life sciences kind of research. I think it could be used, in other areas as well, in physics or in, industrial chemistry or, in other things.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think the validation's focused on biology and medicine. That's because like most of our team's expertise and interests is in those areas. But as you said, the system is general purpose enough. There's like nothing specialized to biology and medicine or life sciences. So you could easily imagine applying it to like other areas of science. And in fact, like, so yeah, when we announced the system, we talked about like a trusted tester program to onboard like more scientists and engineers to the system. And we've seen that like, in fact, only like 1/4 of the applicants have been thinking about like life sciences applications or proposing that like 3/4 are actually in other fields. And so yeah, I think people see the utility in other parts of science as well. I mean, as to like specifically where it could be interesting, I think it's mostly like areas where there is like a lot of like published literature, but it's just impossible for humans to like keep up with them. So if you look at like life sciences and biology as a discipline, right? I think these days people are specializing a lot. I almost feel like they're specializing way too much. Like you go down deep on like one way methodology that you like specialize in and spend like 5 years of your PhD doing that. But what ends up happening is you end up like missing the forest for the trees in some ways. Um, and I guess on the flip side, what you're seeing, especially in biology and medicine, is like a lot of the new recent breakthroughs are at like the intersection of fields. So whether that's CRISPR, which combines like insights from molecular biology and genetics and things like that, or like AlphaFold, which is combining protein structure prediction with AI. Um, so the question is like, okay, how can we use AI to like help with more of these interdisciplinary breakthroughs or ideas that are at this intersection of fields, right? And so that is where I think we think this system could be immensely helpful, where it can, for example, like find relevant ideas in other domains and other topics and surface that to the scientists so that like they have like a better understanding of what is possible and not like constrained by their biases of like what they know or that they have worked on or what is being worked on in their lab or in their immediate environment. So I think that's like one class of like problems that we see, like where there's like a lot of like published evidence and literature. It's impossible for like scientists to keep up, and there's like potential for like interdisciplinary work in there. I think the second thing is, again, I think building on top of that, like, there's also like a lot of like interesting ideas or breakthroughs that seem kind of like obvious in hindsight, but there's maybe not enough people looking at them properly and connecting the dots. And again, when you have like intelligent systems, that can do it for you. You're no longer like bottlenecked by like human knowledge and expertise to be able to connect the dots. Right? You can have like all these geniuses in a data center running, looking through all possible knowledge and trying to connect the dots and see if there's like anything missing. Like any piece of the puzzle that's like obviously there, it just needs to be put in together. So it's not probably like truly like revolutionary ideas or like the next and like like say relativity theory or something like that. It's more like incremental breakthroughs are still like very, very useful. And so like I think the work that we did on drug repurposing is a very good example of that. Like so in this specific scenario, we've been working with like some collaborators at Stanford, and we've been looking at like liver fibrosis, which is this very complex disease affecting like millions of people worldwide, but doesn't have as many effective treatments in the market today. And I mean, our collaborators were interested in like specific kinds of like repurposing targets over here. And the system was able to find that a very well-known anti-cancer drug that's on the market today. Uh, I mean, it looked at like its mechanisms of action, and it figured out that this could be highly effective in the case of like liver fibrosis. Right, and so then we did those experiments with like organoids. We see like antifibrotic activity, but also more interestingly, we see like liver cell regeneration, which is like an important characteristic of like liver disease and liver cells in general. And so it's like maybe not a revolutionary idea, right? Okay, take this anti-cancer drug, apply it to liver fibrosis, and it's probably obvious because the mechanism of action kind of like directly leads you to liver fibrosis if you understand the disease well. But you didn't have anyone connecting the dots properly. There were some like studies in like clinical in like animals here and there, but no one took it up to like a trial to like take this forward. And so those are the kind of things that we are hoping the system will enable, right? Like surface those very, in some ways, low hanging fruits, like incremental ideas, but like potentially high impact. And then I think like eventually as these systems improve, like the more we trial them, the more we um, get the right kind of feedback and like flywheels going in the system. I'm hoping that like maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be able to like crack both from an algorithmic perspective, but also from like um, the way in which we like develop these systems, that they'll be able to like come up with these Einstein level breakthroughs. But I don't think we are there yet. So I think for now, the next 1 to 2 years, it's going to be like a lot of these things that would seem like obvious in nature, like low hanging in nature, but still out there, left to be discovered and like left to be acted on.
Yeah. I mean, it could very well be the case that nobody in the world had actually read those two papers, right? Like the one, where you show that drug, and then the one where you talk about, mechanisms of actions related to, liver fibrosis. And if a human or an expert human had read both papers, they probably would have been able to connect the dots, right? Like it just, nobody has the time to read I think it's literally, uh, what is it, like tens of millions of papers a year are added to the NIH database?
Yeah, something like that.
It's literally tens of millions, right? Like, I mean, no, there's no human in the world, like not even a team of humans, right, that could read everything.
Yeah.
Um, it's actually funny that you mentioned, Einstein, right? Like, I think, one of the big breakthroughs, was precisely when I don't remember what was the exact anecdote, right? But I think Einstein was talking with somebody else about non-Riemannian geometry, right? And I was talking with somebody that mentioned, Lobachevsky space or whatever, and that's kind of where the idea of like the curvature of space time came through, right? And that's what eventually led to special relativity and so on and so forth, right? But yes, like yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like whether we will be able to reach that level of scientific insight with current technology, right? With language models, so we'll need something uh, beyond that, right? I think maybe a few years ago somebody would say, well, if these language models are so intelligent, what are the true revolutionary discoveries, right? Like where are the Nobel prizes for AI? Well, we already got one Nobel Prize for AI, right? And I think that there probably will be, many, many more, right? Like maybe at some point we'll have to go ahead it kind of like, or the Nobel Prize committee will have to, split, between, human and AI. I mean, the same way that is now in chess, right? Like, humans cannot possibly compete with computers in chess anymore, right? So yeah, it makes no sense, right? There are competitions for humans in chess, and there are competitions for computers in chess, right? And the computers are just, orders of magnitude superior to humans, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think chess is a very interesting example because I mean, a lot of people would have, predicted that once like you reach superhuman performance with AI, then the field of chess would actually die down. There's like going to be not many human players and things like that. But literally the opposite has happened now. If you look at like the ELO ratings of the players since like say something like Stockfish came along, they're on average like much higher, much better. The quality of the matches has improved much more. And so like people have been able to like leverage AI to like train themselves and make themselves better, which is I think a really cool thing. And there's also the flip side over here because like there's some criticism where like people say, okay, these matches are becoming like more robotic in nature or more monotonous in nature. That's expected, but I think we'll again like go past that barrier.
Yeah.
So, and so
So, I mean, of course, science is inherently useful for other things beyond entertainment value, right? Or, or bragging rights or, whatever people do, when they're good chess players. Um, so maybe well, a little bit digging deeper into the AI co-scientist. But, if I remember right, one of the things that was interesting is that it's structured as multiple agents, right, that interact, in different ways. Like maybe can you talk a little bit about like why would you have or when would you have multiple agents versus a single agent? Like what are the benefits of that approach?
yeah, I think it's again like an interesting trend that was maybe not fully obvious when we released the paper, but I think it's becoming a little bit more obvious right now after like Alpha Evolve also came out yesterday. Um,
Yes. Oh my
but
goodness. Yeah, I still need to catch up ahead. Yes.
yeah, no, but I think it's a fun trend where we're actually trying to see that like with like modern reasoning based language models, you can actually do optimization uh, through language guided instructions and feedback. Right. So previously, if you had to like teach a system like a neural network to do something, you would have to set up like a problem with like an objective function with an optimizer and then do like gradient descent. And then if you had to make them like do really well, then you'll figure out like a reinforcement learning method. And that was obviously complex. But right now, what we are having or what we're seeing is like language models are able to maybe if you stitch them up together in the right way, they're able to like search and learn similar to how like humans might do. Like, like you could give me like a language based instructions and I could like learn from it and do a given task, right? I mean, you don't know, okay, if that's like literally updating like the synapses connections in my brain or not. I think we don't have the level of understanding. But let's say this, I think like language based instructions work for humans. Now we are starting to see that that kind of like implicit feedback, which is purely language based, is also working for LLMs. And so in co-scientists, I think that's one method of like putting that together, where we have like a team of agents where like one agent is like continuously like generating solutions, and then a bunch of them like reviewing them and like giving implicit feedback, and then there's another agent which is like improving on top of them. So if you just like rearrange or reconfigure the blocks in another way, it is actually no different from like any kind of like reinforcement learning method. I mean, you have like a policy model, you'll have like a reward model, and then you have like the environment giving you reward signals over here, like the critique, right? And so, I mean, that's what we have. Like the policy model equivalent is the idea generation agent that's continuously proposing hypotheses. The reward model over there is like the one that's doing the reviews and the ones that doing the ranking and the prioritization in the tournament. And again, there's like some parallels of that with like Alpha Star, for example, where Alpha Star that we use like a tournament between like the different agents playing to like rank them and give them feedback signals. So it's a similar setup over here where you have these ELO ratings to compare the different ideas and rank them, and then you use those like feedback from the tournament to like improve in the next round. And then you have like another agent which kind of like updates the policy, which is the evolving, which is the evolution agent. But like again, it's like the classical paradigm of RL, like the same components, but instead of using like gradient descent based methods, it's like language feedback that is like continuously running through the system to update the system's like understanding to like solve a given problem. So that's how I would put it. I think it's a different way of thinking, but I think it's an exciting way because I think it opens up a new way of like optimizing AI systems for like search and discovery which was otherwise, I would say, like a bit more complex. Right? I think like reinforcement learning has a learning curve, whereas I think like multi-agent based systems or like language guided optimization, I think lowers the barrier quite a bit.
Yep, yep. It was, but I mean, somehow I was under the impression as well that even at inference time, when you have some functionality that is split into different agents that are more specialized, right? Like maybe with prompts that kind of have multiple examples and whatnot, you get better results than if you try to use a single agent that has a wide variety of different tools and actions that it can take that has maybe all the examples of the potential actions that you may have, right? So like the kind of functional breakdown into different components of it, leads to better results. Like if we think about, like medical diagnosis, right? Like you would have, one model that understands images and another model that understands, the user or the patient, medical chart, and then another model that kind of extracts the important bits and then makes the final diagnosis or whatever, right? And by breaking it down, it's easier to get to the reliability and kind of quality of results, right? Like, but that which is a little bit different, right? Like, if I understood correctly, you're talking a little bit more about at training time, right? Like rather than at inference.
Yeah, I think there's maybe no real difference between training and inference time right now, right? Because I think the learning is happening during inference in some ways, right? So it's not like you train a model once and then you deploy it and then it produces an answer in like a zero shot fashion or whatever. Rather, it's like a continuous process that's happening. So at inference through test time reasoning, the model is continuously refining its output. So I think now the boundaries between like training and inference has like become a little bit more murky in the sense that there is actually like learning and improvement actually happening during what you would actually traditionally call as inference. Um, but yeah, I think it's just a different way of thinking right now with these reasoning models and approaches.
Interesting. And maybe just to close this question, then, so is it a valid assumption, right? Like that breaking it down into multi-agentic systems is better than having a single agent or not?
Yeah, I think it's also like a function of like the underlying base model capabilities, right? And so, I mean, we've been working on this thing for like 12, I mean, actually 18 months now. And when we started, it was like the Gemini, like 1.0, 1.5 versions of those models. And they were like, I mean, limited in the kind of like instructions they could follow and the kind of tasks that they could do. So if you give them like too many complex tasks with like too many steps, then they would obviously break. So you had to like, make them like really, really granular over there. And so that would mean like, more specialized agents. Whereas as the underlying system capabilities improve, you could like give them more and more complicated tasks and they would like be able to like solve them more faithfully and intelligently and capably. So yeah, I think like whether it's like, 100 agents or 10 agents or one agents, it's also largely a function of like the base model capability. And I wouldn't be surprised that if in the future, like there's actually a base model that's so good that following complex instructions and like making sense of very complex problems that you don't require a multi-agent system. It's a single agent. I mean, almost like humans, right? I mean, you don't have to like make like 5 copies of me to solve a given task or whatever. Or like, I mean, yeah, sure. You need like teams of people to do something complex, but like ideally, like if someone's capable enough, they should be able to do a task directly on their own. And as we see the progress, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like you don't have these multi-agent setups in the future because the base models are just so good that they can just do it all on their own, like sequentially do the planning, use like appropriate tools, and then solve these problems on their own without this explicit task decomposition.
Interesting. Um, Yeah, and I guess when you started also there were no reasoning models, right?
Yeah,
With heavy load also, right? And now reasoning adds a whole new depth of the ability to follow complex instructions. Another thing that is super, super interesting is this notion of self-play and elo rating, right? Which I guess that comes inspired from chess as well. And I mean, like back in RL, right? Like I remember when AlphaGo came out, right? Like, one of the really interesting things was, this ability to play against itself and how it drastically improved by playing against itself. And I guess in some ways it's novel, right? Like the idea of like, well, can we use this for scientific discovery, right? Like a scientific, discovery model, somehow playing against itself in order to improve the way that it operates. So I think that is a very interesting idea, right? And you show, if I remember right on the paper, how the system kind of is able to meaningfully improve, right? Like by kind of testing different ideas against itself.
yeah. And that comes down to the notion of that. tournament that you have. So in the tournament, like ideas from different sources are like continuously um, like there's a match like against each other, and so you play these matches, you compute the winner and the loser, and then you use that to like compute like elo scores across the tournament, similar to chess, right? And so that's the self play, like the systems playing against each other to come up with the best possible idea and like get the best possible score in the tournament. And that, I mean, it's not an explicit optimization trying to like come up with like the best possible ideas. It's more like implicit, like just gaming the system. But that itself like creates this nice like virtuous cycle and feedback loop that like leads to improvements in the reasoning capability, that we see that like, okay, the more the system spends time in this tournament and trying to like compete with each other, with itself rather, the quality of the ideas keep on like improving. And yeah, I mean, we have these nice graphs in the paper where we show that like even after like several days of computation, the ideas qualities don't saturate, they sometimes become better even after that. And like, yeah, it's a funny thing, like sometimes we've seen in like a few cases where like the system, like you give it a complex problem, like first 2 or 3 days it's like the ideas are all like not so good, like very generic, and then suddenly on the fourth day you see something like really creatively like creative emerge out of the system. And so we are still like trying to understand these capabilities, because that's also the challenge with multi-agent systems, in the sense that like the emergent capabilities that come up are actually broader than what you would have with like a single agent, like a single LLM as well. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting area for us to study, but we are observing all these phenomena right now.
Um, I think one aspect of this, which I think is very interesting, is not in the scientific discovery world, but in the agents for writing software side of things. Your I guess your iteration cycle is a little bit shorter, right? So like you could have, one agent, write code, and another agent, compiles it and runs it and evaluates it, right? And maybe that's part of the reason why it seems more feasible, right, to build a system that autonomously writes code versus a system that autonomously does science, right? Because as in science, in general, right, like especially biological science, things like that. Right? Like, if you're suggesting a new molecule, it's going to take a while to synthesize that molecule, to
Exactly.
set up the systems, to apply it and so on and so forth. I
Yeah.
don't remember what, I think you said you use organoid models. Like even in organoid models, you're talking about like multiple days, right? So yeah, yeah. Probably the faster than months, I guess.
Well, I mean, it depends on like, yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's just the iteration cycle is incredibly slow, right? Compared with what we're used to in computer science, right? We're just, write code, compile, run,
right.
write code, compile, run, write code, compile,
Yeah.
run. Like you can do literally like hundreds of different of these iterations within one workday, right? And in science, you're talking about iterations, I don't know, per year.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting point and comment, and that's also one of the things that you'll have to like teach the system to do, which is to deal with like delayed rewards, um, right? Or like when experiments take like weeks to run. Um, it might be okay. The system just sleeps during that period, but like yeah, I think that's one of the things that we have to like understand and improve right now in the system.
Mhm. Um, we're going a little bit kind of deeper than this rabbit hole, right? Like one of the things that I think is interesting as well from um, biological sciences in general, right, is that it is not maybe a winner take all market like we normally see in tech, right? Like where people would compete very very hard when the new technologies come up, because in many cases you see network effects that drive people to converge around a single thing, right? And we saw that with Google itself, right? Like back in the day, right? Like there were many different search engines, but one of them happened to be better, right? And then it became much much larger, much more significant, right? And you saw the same thing with like social media platforms or whatever, right? That are because of the low cost of reproduction or usage or whatever, right? And strong network effects, things kind of tend to emerge. But I think that is, or in my mind, that is a little bit different in life sciences and biology, right? Like there's no network effect. If you find a drug for disease A, like why would it make it better or easier for you to find a drug for disease B? Like I think but in my mind that the network effects are a little bit different, right? So the the question that I have, and I'd love to to hear from you is, do you think, once we have some of the systems that are really effective, that can be useful to, find repurposable drugs or to come up with truly novel therapies for, some of the thousands of diseases for which we have nothing. Like, do you think we're going to see this type of winner take all dynamics where maybe Google, maybe somebody else, would have this, really, really good scientist system, or maybe we'll have, multiple people using multiple of these systems and then, eventually developing, hundreds of different therapies independently.
Yeah, I tend to think less about like competition and winners and losers. For me, I think it's if we have a competition, I think that's against like diseases, and that's against like all the problems like plaguing humanity today.
Yeah.
It's not like competition with like other on foundation model companies or frontier AI labs or like other people doing cool research. So at least personally for me, I'm not in that mindset. So like we are racing, but we are racing to crack open these diseases, improve our understanding of biology, solving hard problems in science. And so again, I can't predict like what happens in the future. But like if we are successful in our endeavor and show like the capabilities of say like our Google's AI models like Gemini and such tasks, then maybe more and more people will adopt it. And but I would almost think that's definitely not the goal. That's more like a byproduct over here of the innovation and the kind of like research breakthroughs we are able to make. So I would say that's what we are focused on. And then I think the second order effects, the third order effects, I think that can take its due course. We don't have to bother about it right now, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because so many people are maybe. I mean, I don't know. Look, you hear about it all the time, right? This AI race, right, and competition within countries and companies or whatever. Right? Like, whereas at least within life sciences and in particular drug discovery, you have a system that promotes um, or kind of, encourages, people from necessarily competing against each other as much as, kind of trying to solve a disease, right? I guess like
Yeah.
patents, for example, right? Like, patents for drugs expire much earlier than patents for everything else, right? So even if, a company will come up
But
with
there are no real bad patents in software, right? Like, so that, that's like fully open over here.
yeah,
So that's the complete opposite in some ways. Like, at least in drugs, like, if you come up with like a molecule, you have like 10 to 12 years before which, up to which you can like maximize the commercial impact of your discovery. Whereas in software, no, you have to like be relentless.
yeah.
You have to keep innovating. You have to keep like your product has to keep being better every single day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but in other areas, like if you discover a new material, right? Like, or if you have some kind of, I don't know, something else, or like you may have a much longer kind of, protection of it, right? Like, once, your patent expires in life science, anybody can go and make that same medicine for everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Now I'm not too knowledgeable about like other fields beyond medicine, but again, I feel like, yeah, in some ways what's happening is good because I feel like a lot of like the life sciences development over the last 30, 40 years was kind of like isolated to like specific parts of the world and I guess in the US, primarily in the East Coast. Right. But right now we are seeing like this infusion of like modern Silicon Valley way of thinkings, but like going after like life sciences based problems. And there's like a lot of this interesting pollination of ideas and ways of working that's happening. And I think that's actually going to lead to like very interesting results and much faster breakthroughs than what would have been previously possible. So in some ways, I think it's going to like wake up the industry and like lead to more competition, but like in a good way that actually accelerates progress. And so that's my hope at least.
yeah. And maybe, we're actually, getting close to, I guess, the 1 hour limit, which I think is about the limit of the attention span of the average podcast listener. Maybe, to close this out, how about something bold? Like when would you think we may see, say, a second Nobel Prize for an AI discovery, right? Maybe Yeah, I mean, even in not for like the team had plenty of expertise, right? So it wasn't really a fully AI driven, right? It was more of a, I guess, human driven discovery, that came up with an algorithm that turned out to be very, very, very useful, right? But when you think we may have a system like co-scientists or something else,
Yeah.
coming up with say a novel pathway that nobody had realized, and then designing the experiments for it and running those experiments, proving it, publishing it, and so on and so forth, and then coming up with a scientific discovery that is worthy of of a prize.
Um, yeah, I mean, we have these debates all the time. I think for me, it's again like it feels like something that's definitely possible within the 5 to 10 year mark. And Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that will be awarded like a Nobel Prize in that window, but like I think the discovery will happen in that window. Like discoveries will happen in that window, and it may be possible that after that, like almost all the important discoveries are actually primarily driven by AI-based systems. So it'll probably be some sort of an inflection point, but I think that's roughly like 5 years away.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I hope you're right. Because
Yeah,
I mean, there's definitely lots of problems for lots of diseases for which you may want to find a cure, right? Like, so if we could do it, over the, during our lifetime, that would be fantastic.
yeah. I mean, that's a hope. Like that's a dream. That's like 5, 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know, but it feels like that's like a mission worthy of a lifetime's work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's hard to top that, right? So couldn't agree more. Maybe we'll just leave the conversation there. Hopefully, some interesting, thoughts and uplifting message for anybody that may be listening to this. So thank you so much. It was a fantastic chat, and I very much enjoyed it, Vivek.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, it was very interesting to go into like specific rabbit holes and talk about the things. So again, thank you so much for your time.